My name is Dave Einhorn. I live about 1.5 miles from the Boeing San Susanna Field Laboratory. There was a health risk assessment done possibly a year ago that indicated there was a higher risk of cancer from the Boeing Santa Susanna Field Lab. Now, there are some things that are missing from this presentation. You do not give the routes that possibly will be taken when removing material. I know for a fact there is a large cluster of children that were along one of the routes that were taken, and they developed cancer of the eye. And I'm sure that has something to do with radiation. Cancer of the eye is very rare, and to have a large cluster is evidence of something going very wrong, taking out the material from the site. As far as I'm concerned, nothing should be done. This facility is a witch's brew of radiation, hazardous waste. Now, another thing you didn't include in your presentation is how many cubic yards of material, how many truckloads are you going to be taking out? How much radioactive dust, hazardous waste dust is going to be raised with this demolition? And I would like some answers to my questions.
Can I make sure again, just that we got all three? Transportation routes you've identified, no action should be taken. Is that one of your comments? Okay, and you want to know how many cubic yards of material are going to be disposed of as a result of the proposed alternative? Is that right? Okay, thank you. Next.
Shel Plotkin. I'm with the Southern California Federation of Scientists, also the Rocketdyne Cleanup Coalition. I wrote out brief comments from our organization and emailed them to you to meet the deadline. And I got a note back from my server that the address I had was no good. So I wrote it out and mailed it to you. So it came in late. I think maybe just to make sure that these things are accounted for, that I should just read the short statement I had to read.
You have a copy tonight also?
Do you have a copy of it?
I have a copy of it.
All right, so you got a copy. All right. So our comments are pretty much the same for the entire DOE cleanup operation. The problem is extending back to the beginning of the cleanup effort. First, Rocketdyne, the polluter, was hired over the vehement objections of the public to characterize the contamination, that is, decide what needed to be cleaned up. Second, DOE reneged on its initial promise to use EPA standards for Superfund sites, that is 10 to the minus 6 risk level. Instead, it concocted its own standard, 10 to the minus 4 risk level, that makes for greater health risk by a factor of 100. So now, after all this bureaucratic maneuvering, the DOE is pretending to listen to public comments. We haven't been listened to for 18 years, so why should we be listened to now? What's changed at this late date? And for the record, we contend that the site is still sufficiently contaminated to preclude the land being safe for residential occupancy. In fact, it's been judged to only be safe enough for short day hikes. This is a violation of the unrestricted use requirement. For example, an EIS for the entire cleanup is certainly in order. Finally, let the record show that the SCFS firmly contends that the DOE simply places money above human health. We charge that this agency's attitude is the height of irresponsibility. Rocketdyne made large profit contaminating the area in years past, so the DOE can just as well spend the money required today for Rocketdyne to clean up the radioactive toxic chemical contamination after an EPA characterization of present standards. Much needs to be done. And along those lines, let me just point out that just several things in the past. First of all, one of the EPA physicists, Greg Dempsey, has been on the property a few times. Every single time he gets on the property, he finds that the cleanup's being done wrong, in some significant respect. So what's happened? Well, first of all, Rocketdyne decided they wouldn't allow Greg Dempsey on the property anymore. The second thing, the EPA now won't even allow him to come to meetings, let alone have some responsibility. And the public asked that he be in charge of a group of people selected by him to do a recharacterization of the property. And we were told that he just didn't have the time to do that. He's too committed to other things around the country. But he was nailed on the last meeting he attended that I recall. He was asked specifically by me that whether or not he would have the time to supervise a group of people of his selection who would do the characterization and evaluation of the cleanup. And his responsibility, besides selecting the people involved, would be to just review the report that they came up with to see if he agreed or not. And after long thought, he said yes, he could work that into his schedule. Well, to this day, the EPA won't allow him, and I'm sure there's collusion between DOE and EPA on this matter. So that's just one facet. Something else, the public used to be allowed to come on kind of in the beginning and observe the cleanup process and what they were doing. And finally, even some of us that weren't all that acquainted with cleanup techniques were ruled off the property, and we weren't allowed to come back on anymore. And on one occasion, when I was there, I asked that they test in one building, not this one, but another building, that they go to the bottom of a pit where a radioactive accident had occurred and monitor to see if there was any radioactivity left there. And they went berserk. The people involved absolutely refused. And with statements about the safety was a problem. So, well, to make a long story short, at one of the public meetings, and when this particular subject came up, they hollered safety again, and I asked the question, was there anybody in the audience who was a licensed safety engineer? And from the company, or DOE, or EPA, or anybody. There wasn't any. I was the only one. And so at that point, I assured them that I could figure out a very safe way of testing the contamination at the bottom of this pit so that nobody would be harmed, and that was the end of it. They refused to do that. And that's just an example of the kind of thing that's been going on up there. So the public's been up against it, and it's perfectly obvious that this whole thing, like Dan said, was a sham. You say you're listening to us. You're not listening. You're taking notes. And all the people here that represent a DOE, for example, do not have the authority to make a decision. A fundamental decision as to what is to be done and what is not to be done. You're taking notes like you have the authority, but I know you don't. And all you do is pass on the information to somebody who's not here who makes a decision.